The wedding hall in Atlanta was glowing that night, chandeliers sparkling over round tables dressed in white and gold. Everyone was laughing, sipping champagne, and clinking glasses. My grandson, Jacob, looked so handsome in his suit, standing tall beside his bride, Emily. But while the music played and the photographers snapped pictures, my eyes locked onto something that made my blood run cold. My name tag. It didn't say Grandma Walker. It didn't even say Margaret, my given name. No, in bold, mocking letters it read, "The old lady who won't stop living in our house." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled as I touched the plastic badge pinned to my chest. My heart pounded, not from age, but from anger. It wasn't a joke. It was a message. A cruel one. I sat quietly watching them laugh, watching the bride's family glance at me with smirks, as though I were some unwanted relic clinging to life. And then, when the best man finished his speech, I knew it was my turn. I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the polished floor. Glasses clinked down. Heads turned. Jacob smiled politely, thinking I might share a few sweet words. But instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded envelope. "This," I said, my voice carrying across the hall, "is a copy of my late husband's will." The room fell silent, forks freezing midair. Emily's smile vanished. The bride's mother gasped. Even Jacob blinked, confused. I unfolded the paper slowly, deliberately. My hands were steady now because I knew exactly what I was about to say would change everything. But before I revealed a single word, I paused, scanning the sea of shocked faces. Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. Let me know where you are watching from. You don't know, you might be lucky to get a shout out on our next video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel if you like stories like this. Now, let me take you back. Because before this moment, before the will, before the cruel name tag, before the silence that filled that wedding hall, there was me, a 72-year-old woman who only wanted peace, family, and kindness in the home I once built with love. I was born and raised in Georgia, and after my husband George passed away, I thought my family would stay close, supportive, and united. But grief changes people, and so does greed. It started small with whispers about the house. My daughter-in-law, Patricia, Emily's mother, was the loudest voice. "The house is too big for her," I once overheard her say. "She should move into a home. It's selfish for her to hold on to it." Selfish. That word stung. George and I had worked our whole lives for that house. It wasn't just bricks and paint. It was where Jacob learned to ride his bike in the driveway, where birthdays were celebrated, and where Christmas stockings hung year after year. It was my safe place. My memory of George, my anchor. Still, I ignored Patricia's words, choosing kindness over confrontation. I baked pies for every family gathering. I smiled when they rolled their eyes at my stories. I tried, desperately, to keep peace. But peace is never enough for those who only see you as an obstacle. The weeks leading up to the wedding were full of tension. Patricia dropped little hints, sometimes in front of me, sometimes not. After the wedding, Jacob and Emily will need space, you know. That old house would be perfect for starting their family. I would sit quietly, my tea growing cold in my hands as if I hadn't heard. But I always heard. The night before the wedding, Maria, my housekeeper and dearest friend, found me sitting at the kitchen table with tears in my eyes. "Miss Maggie," she said softly, "you can't let them push you aside. That house is yours. Mr. George made sure of it." I nodded, but doubt weighed on me. Was I being selfish? Was Patricia right? Then, Maria placed her hand on mine. "You showed me the will years ago. You know what it says. Don't let them shame you for existing." Her words stirred something in me. A fire. I remembered George's handwriting, firm and certain, declaring that the house and the bakery we built together would always be mine until I was no longer living. Only then would it pass to the next generation. That night, I decided to bring a copy of the will with me, not to cause drama, but to protect myself in case the cruelty escalated. And at the wedding, when I saw that name tag, "The old lady who won't stop living in our house," I knew the time for silence was over. So there I stood, holding the will in my hands, the room frozen, every eye on me. What they didn't know was that this single piece of paper was about to flip their perfect little celebration upside down. The will in my hand felt heavier than any paper I'd ever held. I could see Patricia shift in her seat, her lips pressing tight, her fingers clutching the stem of her wine glass, as though she already knew this wasn't going to go her way. Emily's eyes darted nervously to her mother, while Jacob just looked confused, torn between loyalty and shock. The band had stopped playing. Even the waiters had frozen in place, trays of champagne still balanced midair. This will, I began, my voice steady but strong, was written by my late husband, George Walker. Some of you seem to have forgotten what this house means and what George intended. Patricia let out a forced laugh. Mother Walker, this is hardly the time. Quiet. I cut in, sharper than I had ever spoken to her in my life. A few guests gasped. My entire body shook, but I didn't let it show. For 72 years, I had lived as a peacemaker, as the one who smiled through the insults, who looked the other way when they treated me like a burden. But not tonight. I unfolded the first page slowly, letting the paper echo in the silence. I wanted them to feel it, the weight of their own cruelty. My husband left clear instructions, I continued, that the house we built together, the bakery that fed this community, and the land we own in Georgia will remain in my name until my death. Only then will it pass on. Until that day, it belongs to me and me alone. A murmur rippled across the room. The bride's family shifted uncomfortably. The groom's friends whispered into their drinks. And then one bold voice from the crowd asked, "Is this really happening?" At a wedding. Yes, it was happening. And it wasn't just about the house. It was about respect, about dignity, about telling the truth, even when it makes others squirm. Patricia slammed her glass on the table, the red wine spilling across the white cloth. "You've embarrassed yourself enough, Margaret," she hissed. "Sit down before you ruin Jacob's day." But I didn't move. Instead, I held the will higher. "No, Patricia. I think Jacob deserves to know the truth. He deserves to know the house you're planning for him, and Emily is not yours to give." Gas spread like wildfire. Jacob's jaw dropped, and Emily's face went pale. Patricia's face, however, turned crimson. And that's when I felt it, a rush of relief. For years, I had carried their whispers, their subtle jabs, their schemes to edge me out. And now, in front of everyone, the truth was laid bare. But before I could say more, a voice rang out from the back of the hall. "Show us proof." It was one of Patricia's cousins, a smug man with too much wine in his system. Anybody can wave paper around. How do we know it's real? I turned slowly, locking eyes with him. My heart hammered, but I lifted my chin. Because I had it notarized, signed, and sealed by the state of Georgia. Every page is stamped. Every word is law. I flipped the document, showing the embossed seal that gleamed under the chandelier lights. The cousin's smirk vanished. And then the unthinkable happened. Patricia lunged forward, snatching at the will. Gasps erupted. Jacob jumped to his feet. Emily cried out, "Mom, stop." But Patricia's fingers had already curled around the edge of the paper, pulling hard. I held firm, refusing to let go. For a split second, it felt like a tug of war between generations, her greed versus my resolve. The sound of paper crinkling filled the room. Guests stood, shouting, some trying to rush forward. And then rip. The will tore straight down the middle. The hall exploded into chaos. The sound of that paper tearing seemed louder than the music had been all night. Everyone gasped, some even screamed. A guest dropped his champagne flute, glass shattering across the marble floor. Patricia stood there, clutching half of the will like she had just slain a dragon. Her face was red, sweat beading on her forehead, her chest heaving as if victory had finally been snatched from my hands. "You see," she shouted, waving the torn piece. "It's just paper. Worthless. She's crazy, completely lost her mind." The room erupted in chatter. Some nodded nervously, too polite to question her in public. Others looked at me with pity, their eyes silently asking why I was humiliating myself like this. But a few, just a few, looked furious at Patricia. Jacob grabbed her arm. "Mom, what did you just do?" Emily buried her face in her hands, whispering, "No, no, no." I stood taller, holding the remaining half of the will in my hand. My heart was racing, my throat tight, but I forced my voice to steady. Patricia, you can rip the paper, but you cannot rip the truth. The original is safe. What you just tore is only a certified copy. The entire hall fell silent again. Patricia blinked. What? I smiled, though my hands trembled. Did you really think I would bring the original document here tonight? No, my dear. That's locked safely at my attorney's office. Stamped, notarized, and filed in the courthouse records. Nothing you did here tonight changes the fact that the law is on my side. The collective gasp was deafening. Patricia's victory turned to ash in her mouth. Her face drained of color, and for the first time since I had known her, she looked truly powerless. Jacob stepped back from her like she was a stranger. Mom, you embarrassed us. At my wedding. His voice broke. You embarrassed Emily. Emily, eyes filled with tears, finally looked up at me. She whispered, Grandma, I'm so sorry. I wanted to reach out and comfort her, but before I could move, Patricia's cousin, the same smug man who had demanded proof earlier, stood up again, his face twisted with rage. This is ridiculous, he shouted, his finger jabbing the air toward me. An old lady like her shouldn't be holding on to property this big. It's selfish. She should hand it over before she ends up in a nursing home. The crowd gasped again, louder this time. Some even shouted at him to sit down, but his words struck deep. I saw how a few guests exchanged uneasy glances, as if considering whether he had a point. And that cut me, not because of what he said, but because I could see how quickly people sided with greed when they thought they might gain from it. I steadied myself, lifting my chin. Selfish, I said, my voice low but sharp. George and I worked for 50 years to build that house, that bakery, that land. I fed this community when times were hard. I opened my doors to neighbors when storms hit. And you call me selfish because I don't want my legacy stolen by those who never lifted a finger for it. The cousin froze, his mouth snapping shut. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then stronger, filling the room like a wave. Not everyone clapped, but enough did that Patricia's face darkened, her cousin slumped back down, and I felt a fire rise in me that had been dimmed for far too long. But then, before I could take a breath of relief, something else happened. Patricia, trembling with rage, grabbed a microphone from the DJ's stand. Her voice cracked as she screamed, You think you've won, old woman? This isn't over. That house will be mine. I swear it. And in her fury, she knocked over the champagne tower behind her, hundreds of glasses crashing down in a sparkling, terrible rain. Guests screamed and scattered, the sound of shattering crystal echoing through the hall. I stood frozen, clutching the half of the will in my hand, as Patricia's rage destroyed not just her image, but the wedding itself. The crash of the champagne tower was deafening, like 1,000 bells shattering at once. Golden liquid spilled across the dance floor, mixing with broken glass. Guests scrambled, some lifting their dresses, others shielding their shoes, and the room dissolved into chaos. Patricia stood in the center of it all, gripping the microphone with trembling hands, her face pale but eyes burning with fury. Her voice screeched over the chaos. That house will be mine. Do you hear me? Mine. Jacob rushed forward, snatching the microphone from her. Mom, stop it. You're ruining everything. But Patricia was beyond reason. She shoved him back, nearly knocking him into Emily. Gasps erupted again. The bride stumbled, tears spilling down her cheeks. Emily's father moved quickly to steady her, his face twisted in disgust as he turned toward Patricia. Enough, he barked. The DJ killed the sound system, leaving only the crackle of broken glass under frantic feet. For the first time in the evening, Patricia seemed to realize how everyone was staring at her, with judgment, with shame, with pity. She staggered backward, muttering, This isn't over, this isn't over. Security from the venue appeared at the doors, summoned by the commotion. They hesitated, unsure if they should intervene in what was clearly a family disaster. The wedding planner was in tears, trying to salvage what remained of the night, but the damage had been done. I stood where I was, my half of the will still clutched tightly in my hand. My chest rose and fell heavily, but my voice carried clear and strong when I finally spoke. Patricia, I said, do you see what greed does? Do you see what it makes of a person? The room quieted. Even the clinking of cleanup stopped. I didn't shout. I didn't rage. I simply let the words hang in the air. And in that silence, Patricia seemed smaller than I had ever seen her, as though the weight of her own shame was pressing down on her shoulders. Emily, shaking, looked at me with wide eyes. Grandma, I didn't know she. I didn't know she hated you this much. I reached for her trembling hand. It isn't your fault, darling. Love doesn't look like this. Love doesn't destroy. But just as Emily leaned into me, something happened that froze the entire hall again. Patricia's cousin, the same man who had defended her earlier, stood up with a smirk, raising his glass high. Well, he sneered, if the will says what she claims, then maybe it's time someone challenged it. Maybe it's time this family found out whether the old lady is bluffing. He slammed his glass down, shattering it on the table. The sound rang out like a gunshot, and every eye turned toward him. Patricia, wild-eyed, latched onto his words. Yes, we'll challenge it. She can't stop us all. The cousin grinned darkly, and for the first time, I realized Patricia wasn't alone in her hunger. She had allies, greedy, conniving ones who were just waiting for their chance. The hall filled with a tense, choking silence. The wedding had turned into a battlefield, and the lines had been drawn. I clutched Emily's hand tighter, my pulse racing, as Patricia and her cousin stood shoulder to shoulder against me. And in that moment I knew the real war for George's legacy had only just begun. The wedding hall felt more like a courtroom now than a place of joy. Laughter had been replaced with whispers, clinking glasses replaced with pounding heartbeats. The bride's veil trembled as Emily tried to hold herself together, while Jacob's face was twisted in disbelief. Patricia and her cousin, his name was Howard, stood tall, like they had suddenly formed an alliance. Their smug grins made bile rise in my throat. Howard raised his voice so the entire room could hear. Everyone here should know the truth. Margaret is hoarding property that rightfully belongs to this family's future. Why should an old woman live alone in a house that could serve Jacob and Emily as they start their lives together? Gasps again. My cheeks burned, but not from shame, from fury. Howard, I said, my voice sharp, you've never paid a cent toward that house, that bakery, or that land. Not one brick, not one nail, not one loaf of bread was your doing. You think you can take what you did not build. A few guests clapped softly, their support a thin rope in a storm. But Howard smirked, feeding off Patricia's rage. You see, folks, he went on, pointing straight at me. She doesn't deny it. She is hoarding. What kind of grandmother keeps her own grandson from a future home? Jacob slammed his hands on the table, so hard the plates rattled. Enough, Howard, he shouted, his voice echoing through the hall. This is my wedding, not your stage. The hall froze again. Jacob's chest heaved as he turned to Patricia. And you, Mom, you've turned my wedding into a circus. How dare you? For a moment, Patricia faltered. Her lips quivered, her hands shook. But then she pointed at me, her voice rising to a shrill scream. Don't you see, Jacob? She's poisoning you against me. She always has. That house should be yours, but she's keeping it from you because she doesn't want to let go. Emily burst into tears. Her father stood and glared at Patricia. You're destroying your son's life because of greed. Shame on you. But Patricia only grew louder, feeding off her cousin's presence. No, shame on her. She wants to die with all the property in her hands. Is that love? Is that family? The room spun with tension, guests caught between sides, some whispering that maybe Patricia had a point, others muttering angrily that she had crossed a line. I steadied my breath, forcing myself to stay calm. If you want to war over this will, I said, my voice clear as crystal, then I promise you you'll lose. George didn't build that legacy for people like you to tear it apart. Patricia laughed bitterly, and Howard joined her. We'll see about that, Margaret, she sneered. And then, with one final dramatic motion, Patricia grabbed the wedding cake knife from the dessert table. She lifted it high, her face wild, and for a terrifying moment, no one knew what she would do. Emily screamed. Jacob rushed forward. Guests stood from their chairs in horror. Patricia's hand trembled as she pointed the knife. Not at me, not at her son, but straight into the wedding cake. With one furious swipe, she dragged the blade down the tiers, toppling the masterpiece onto the floor with a sickening splatter. The hall erupted into screams and chaos once more. The cake hit the ground with a splatter that silenced the room for half a breath. Then came the gasps, the screams, the shocked cries of children who had been waiting all evening for a slice. White frosting smeared across the polished floor like a wound, strawberries rolling under chairs. Emily collapsed into Jacob's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. The bride's perfect day was destroyed, the sweetness of her wedding night stolen by rage. Patricia stood above the wreckage, chest heaving, knife still in her hand. The sight of her, once a polished woman in an elegant gown, now looked more like a villain from a nightmare. "Do you see?" she screeched. "This is what happens when no one listens to me. When she jabbed the knife in my direction, tries to make me look small." Security finally stepped forward, their hesitation gone. One man carefully approached, his palms out, voice calm. "Ma'am, please put the knife down." But Patricia only gripped it tighter, her knuckles white. "No, I won't be silenced. Not anymore." Jacob tore himself from Emily and marched straight to her. His voice cracked with rage and heartbreak. "Mom, look at yourself. You've ruined everything. My wedding, my marriage, my trust in you. Was the house worth this?" Patricia's face flickered with something, pain, maybe, or realization, but it vanished just as quickly. She snarled, tears brimming but refusing to fall. "You'll thank me one day, Jacob. You'll see I did this for you." Emily's father had heard enough. He motioned to security firmly. "Get her out. Now." The guards moved swiftly, one grabbing her wrist. She struggled, kicking, screaming, "This isn't over. That house will be mine. You'll all regret this." Her shrieks echoed down the hall as she was dragged out, the knife finally wrenched from her hands. Guests murmured nervously, some shaking their heads, others comforting the bride. Silence fell again when the doors closed behind Patricia. Jacob turned back to me, his face pale, his hands trembling. "Grandma, I'm so sorry. I didn't know it was this bad." I placed my hand on his cheek, steady and calm. "It isn't your fault, darling. Greed blinds people. It makes them forget love, forget family." Emily, her mascara streaked, sniffled. I just wanted a wedding day filled with joy. Not this nightmare." The hall's atmosphere was heavy, broken, as though joy had been sucked away. Some guests slipped out, murmuring excuses, unwilling to stay in the shadow of scandal. The wedding planner looked devastated, mumbling about refunds and ruined photographs. But before anyone could breathe relief, Howard, the cousin, stood again. His smirk had returned, though his voice carried an edge of menace. "Don't think this is finished just because she's gone," he sneered, brushing cake crumbs off his jacket. "Patricia may be a mess, but she's right about one thing. That house, that land, it shouldn't belong to one old woman clinging to the past. If Patricia doesn't fight, then I will." A chill rippled through the hall. His eyes locked on me like a predator, his voice dropping low enough that only those near could hear the venom. "You'll wish you'd never pulled that wool out tonight." My breath caught, and for the first time, I realized Patricia's madness wasn't the end of this storm. It was only the beginning. Howard's words cut through the wreckage of the wedding hall like a blade. The guests, who had been murmuring uneasily, turned their eyes toward him. The spilled champagne, the shards of glass, the destroyed cake, all of it faded into the background compared to the venom dripping from his tone. "You'll wish you'd never pulled that wool out tonight," he repeated, his grin spreading as though he had just placed a bet he knew he'd win. Emily gasped, clinging tighter to Jacob. Jacob, whose jaw had been clenched since Patricia's breakdown, stepped forward with fire in his eyes. "Howard, you've already done enough damage by siding with my mother tonight. You're not family. You don't belong here." But Howard only laughed, a low and bitter sound. "Oh, Jacob, you think I need your approval? I don't. All I need is a lawyer, and trust me, there are plenty who'd love to dig into that while your precious grandmother is parading around." He turned his sharp gaze on me, his voice booming so the room could hear. "Old wills have a way of falling apart in court. Technicalities, misfilings. You'd be surprised what a determined man can do." A cold ripple spread across my skin. Not because I feared Howard's threat. George's will had been properly notarized, filed, and secured, but because I recognized the glint in his eyes. It wasn't about fairness or family. It was about control, about greed. The same sickness that had consumed Patricia was alive in him, and perhaps even stronger. The crowd was restless now. Some whispered that this was too much. Others looked at me with pity, as though I were a fragile relic about to be picked apart. I stood tall, refusing to let my voice shake. "Howard," I said clearly, "you can threaten all you like, but the truth doesn't bend to greed. The will stands." George made sure of it. His smirk faltered, if only for a second, but then he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "We'll see, Margaret. We'll see." The tension in the room grew unbearable. Emily's father finally spoke, his voice sharp as a whip. "That's enough. This is a wedding, not a courtroom. If you have business with Margaret, take it somewhere else." Howard sneered, but for once he held his tongue. He tossed back the last of his champagne, slammed the glass down, and stormed toward the exit, muttering about how this wasn't over. The doors slammed shut behind him. The silence that followed was suffocating. Guests sat frozen, eyes wide as though afraid to move. Some couples whispered excuses and slipped away, desperate to escape the storm. Others stayed, out of loyalty or curiosity, their faces etched with unease. Jacob turned to me, his face pale. "Grandma, what if he's serious? What if he really tries to fight you in court?" I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Then let him try. George and I built our lives on honesty and hard work. The law protects that, Jacob. But more importantly, love protects it." Emily sniffled, her eyes red from crying. "I just wanted a wedding where everyone came together." And instead, her voice broke, and she buried her face against Jacob's shoulder. My heart ached for her. Weddings were supposed to be the beginning of a new chapter, filled with hope and joy. And yet, her day had been overshadowed by greed, betrayal, and destruction. Still, I couldn't let despair take hold. I knew what George would have told me. "Stand firm, Margaret. Don't let the snakes coil around your heart." So I straightened my back and looked at Emily. "Darling, don't let them steal your joy. This day is about you and Jacob, not Patricia, not Howard, not anyone else. Their actions show who they are, but they don't define you." Emily wiped her tears and nodded slowly, though her shoulders still trembled. As the guests began to recover, the band awkwardly played a softer tune, trying to salvage the night. Some couples returned to the dance floor, stepping carefully around the broken glass. The atmosphere was fractured, but life moved forward even in the cracks. For a brief moment, I thought the worst had passed. That maybe, just maybe, Patricia and Howard's outburst would be the last I'd hear of their schemes. But then, while the bride and groom danced slowly in the center of the room, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A shadow lingered outside the glass doors of the hall. A tall figure, pacing back and forth, his face barely visible under the dim lights. Howard hadn't left. He was waiting, watching, and as his eyes locked with mine through the glass, his lips curved into a smile that sent a chill straight to my bones. The battle wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Howard's shadow pressed against the glass like a dark omen. The wedding hall had recovered some of its cheer, the band's music rising again. But I couldn't peel my eyes away from the pacing figure outside. My stomach twisted with unease. "Grandma." Jacob's voice was gentle but edged with worry. He followed my gaze, then stiffened when he too saw the shadow. "He's still here." Emily gripped his arm. "Why won't he just leave us alone?" Howard's presence wasn't just unsettling, it was deliberate. He wanted me to see him, to feel hunted. I had dealt with Patricia's cruelty for years, but Howard was something different. He carried the cunning of a man who had spent his life worming his way into other people's fortunes. The band played on, the guests clinked glasses, but my heart beat unevenly. I leaned closer to Jacob. "Don't make a scene. Let him believe we're not rattled. Snakes lose power when they think their bite didn't land." Jacob nodded, though the tension in his shoulders gave him away. Emily buried her face into his chest, whispering that she just wanted this day to end. My chest ached for her. A wedding should be remembered for joy, not fear. As the evening wound down, some of the guests began to leave, whispering their goodbyes while pretending not to notice the figure by the door. A few muttered apologies to me, as though my family's drama had tainted their celebration. Shame tried to creep into my heart, but I stamped it down. I had nothing to be ashamed of. When the music stopped, the hall grew quieter. Jacob walked Emily to their car, and I followed with deliberate calm. My cane clicked against the floor as we stepped outside into the cool Virginia night air. Howard was gone, or at least he appeared to be. The lot was empty except for rows of parked cars and the faint hum of cicadas. But I knew better. Men like Howard didn't disappear. They waited. We drove home in silence, the tension thick in the car. Emily clutched Jacob's hand tightly, her veil folded neatly on her lap, but her eyes were swollen from crying. I wished I could have shielded her from all this ugliness, but life rarely gave us the luxury of peace. When we reached my house, I insisted Jacob and Emily return to their honeymoon plans. Don't let this snake ruin your first days together. I'll be fine. Jacob looked unconvinced. Grandma, maybe we should stay. I cut him off with a smile. Go. Love is stronger than greed, and it deserves to be celebrated. Let me handle the rest. They hugged me tightly before driving away, their car disappearing into the darkness. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, the will resting on the table beside me, and watched the shadows shift across my yard. Each creak of the house made me flinch, but I didn't move. If Howard thought he could frighten me into weakness, he was wrong. By dawn, the world softened. The sky turned pink, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe maybe Howard had given up. But that hope shattered when I stepped outside to fetch the newspaper. A note was tucked into the folds of the paper. The handwriting was jagged, rushed. You don't belong in that house. Leave, or I'll make sure the world sees you for what you really are. My hand trembled as I clutched the note. For the first time, doubt crept into my heart. What did he mean, what you really are? Was it just a bluff, or did Howard know something from my past he could twist against me? I had lived my life with honesty, but like anyone, I had secrets, painful ones I buried deep. Could he know? Or was he simply fishing, hoping fear would drive me out? I tore the note in half, refusing to let it consume me, but the unease lingered. That afternoon, Jacob called to check in. His voice was tired but steady. Grandma, Emily's calmer today. We're trying to focus on us, but I keep thinking about Howard. He won't stop. He won't, I admitted. But that doesn't mean he'll win. Your grandfather prepared for this. He knew family greed could surface, even after death. That's why he added more than one safeguard to the will. Jacob was quiet. Safeguards? Yes, I said softly. But some things must stay hidden until the right time. Patience, Jacob. We'll need it. I didn't tell him about the note. There was no need to burden him further, not yet. That evening I attended church, as I often did when storms gathered in my life. The familiar hymns soothed me, the prayers wrapping around me like a blanket. But even there, among friends, I felt the shadow of Howard looming. When I returned home, the front door was ajar. My breath caught. I had locked it before leaving. Inside, the living room was in disarray. Drawers yanked open, papers scattered, cushions tossed aside. Someone had been searching. The will was still safe where I kept it hidden, but this was no ordinary break-in. Howard had been here. I could feel his presence in the wreckage, his desperation bleeding into the room. I sank onto a chair, fury mixing with fear. He had crossed the line. It wasn't just threats now, it was war. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Next time, I won't be so careful. My hand tightened around the phone, my pulse racing. Howard wasn't going to stop. He wanted me gone, out of the house, out of the way, maybe even out of this world. But he had underestimated one thing. I had survived worse storms than him. And if he wanted a war, he would find I was far from defenseless. For a long time, I sat there in the wrecked living room, staring at the message. Fear whispered at me to run, but resolve burned stronger. Howard thought he could intimidate me into surrender. Instead, he had awakened a fire I hadn't felt in years. I rose, straightened the papers scattered on the floor, and carefully locked the will back in its hiding place. Then I picked up the phone and made a call to someone Howard didn't know about. An ally George and I had trusted with secrets that even Patricia never learned. The moment the voice on the other end answered, I said only one thing. It's happening. I need your help. The silence on the line lasted only a heartbeat before the reply came. I'll be there tomorrow. And just like that, the battle shifted. Howard thought he was playing alone. He was about to learn I wasn't standing in this fight by myself. The night after the break-in was the longest of my life. Sleep would not come. I sat in my armchair, clutching the phone like a weapon, waiting for dawn to peel back the darkness. When the first streaks of light painted the Virginia sky, I felt a measure of relief. Shadows were always less frightening when the sun rose. At precisely 9 in the morning, the doorbell rang. I walked carefully to the door, cane in hand, and opened it to reveal a face I hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades. Margaret, the man said, his voice deep, steady. I smiled, though tears stung my eyes. Thomas, you came. Thomas Reeves had been George's closest friend during his years in the Navy. Where George had been warm and patient, Thomas was sharp, tactical, always 2 steps ahead. After George's passing, Thomas had drifted back to North Carolina, but George had trusted him with things even our children didn't know. And now here he was, standing on my porch like a soldier reporting for duty. He stepped inside, surveying the disarray left from Howard's intrusion. His jaw tightened. He's already making his move. Yes, I said quietly, handing him the crumpled note. And he's not hiding anymore. Thomas read the note, then looked at me with eyes that missed nothing. He's bluffing. But dangerous men get reckless when they're desperate. He wants you afraid. We'll make sure he's the one who panics. It comforted me having Thomas there. He wasn't just George's old friend. He was family in every way that mattered. We spent the morning cleaning up the mess in the house. Thomas insisted on checking every lock, every window, and even the attic. Men like Howard look for cracks. We're sealing them all, he muttered, his military instincts kicking in. By noon, the house was in order, but the unease remained. We sat at the kitchen table, the will resting between us. Thomas tapped the edge of the folder. Does he know what this will says? Not yet, I said. He only suspects. That's why he's escalating. Patricia never knew about the clauses George added at the end. If Howard gets his hands on this, he'll understand just how badly he miscalculated. Thomas leaned back. Then we keep it safe. But Margaret, he hesitated, his voice softening. This isn't just about property anymore. He's made it personal. You need to be prepared for a fight that might get ugly. I met his gaze without flinching. Thomas, I buried a husband, raised children who turned on me, and outlived half the people I loved. Ugly doesn't scare me. Still, my heart whispered a quieter truth. I was afraid. But fear and surrender were not the same. That evening, Thomas insisted we go to the police with evidence of the break-in. I knew it was the right step, but deep down, I doubted it would stop Howard. Men like him slithered around the law. They threatened without proof. They acted through shadows, and they left just enough doubt to keep authorities from acting decisively. The officer who took our statement nodded sympathetically, but offered little comfort. We'll keep an eye out, he said, scribbling notes. But unless you caught him in the act or have cameras, there's not much we can do right now. As expected, when we left the station, Thomas placed a hand on my shoulder. Don't worry about their limits. Howard's mistake is thinking you're alone. He doesn't know me, and he doesn't know how far I'll go to protect you. The gratitude I felt was indescribable. For so long, I had carried this burden by myself. Now, for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. But the sense of safety didn't last long. That night, after Thomas retired to the guest room, I sat by the window again. My thoughts drifted back to George, to the way he had laughed, the way his hand had fit perfectly into mine. For a moment, I let myself imagine he was still here, and Thomas was just visiting us for one of their old poker nights. The ache in my chest was unbearable. I rose to close the curtains when I saw it. Another shadow in the yard. This time not pacing, not taunting, closer, watching. My heart hammered in my chest. I reached for my phone, but the shadow slipped into the darkness before I could dial. My hand shook as I pulled the curtains shut, whispering a prayer under my breath. The next morning, Thomas noticed the strain on my face. He came back, didn't he? I nodded. Thomas's jaw tightened. Then it's time to set a trap. We spent the day preparing. Thomas purchased a small set of cameras, discreet but effective, and placed them at key points around the house. He wants to lurk in the shadows? Fine. We'll make sure the shadows tell the truth. I felt both reassured and terrified. Howard was clever, but Thomas was smarter. Still, part of me wondered how far Howard was willing to go. That evening, the three of us, Thomas, myself, and the silence of the house, waited. I tried to distract myself with knitting, but my hands betrayed me, trembling so badly I dropped the needles twice. Then, just after midnight, Thomas's phone buzzed. One of the cameras had sent an alert. On the screen was a figure, Howard, standing by the back porch, his face caught in the eerie glow of the motion light. But this time he wasn't alone. Another figure stood beside him, smaller, hunched slightly, and when I leaned closer to see the face, my heart stopped cold. It wasn't Patricia. It was someone I hadn't expected to ever see again. Someone who knew secrets I had buried years ago. Someone who could unravel everything. The glow of Thomas's phone lit the room, but my blood ran colder than the midnight air outside. On the grainy screen, two figures stood on my porch. One was Howard, his posture cocky, his smirk practically visible through the pixels. But the other, my lips parted, my heart hammering in disbelief. Evelyn, I whispered. Thomas's eyes snapped to me. You know her? I could barely form words. She is my sister. Yes, my estranged sister. The one I hadn't spoken to in over 30 years. The one I thought had vanished from my life for good. And now she was standing shoulder to shoulder with Howard, like some ghost resurrected to haunt me. Thomas zoomed in, confirming what my heart already knew. Evelyn's face was older, lines etched deep, hair streaked with gray, but her eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were the same. What does this mean, Margaret? Thomas asked carefully. I swallowed hard. Memories I had locked away clawed to the surface. It means Howard isn't acting alone. And worse, he has someone who knows my past. Thomas didn't press, but his silence told me he needed answers. Still, the wounds of my history with Evelyn weren't ones I could reopen so easily. We watched the footage in silence. Howard and Evelyn stood there for several minutes, whispering, pointing at the house, their breath visible in the night air. Finally, they left, but not before Evelyn reached into her coat and pinned something to my door. At dawn, Thomas retrieved it. A photograph. It was old, faded, but I knew it instantly. It was of Evelyn and me as children, standing in front of our childhood home in Richmond, Virginia. But scrawled across the photo in black marker were the words, "The truth always comes back." I sank into a chair, clutching the photo, memories swirling like a storm. Evelyn and I had once been inseparable, but greed had poisoned her heart early. When our parents passed, their modest estate became a battleground. Evelyn wanted everything, and when I refused to give in, she severed ties, spitting venom about how I'd regret crossing her. I thought I had buried that chapter of my life. I thought distance and time had kept her away. But now she was here, aligning herself with Howard. Thomas paced the room. This isn't just about the house or the will anymore. This is personal for her. I nodded weakly. She wants revenge, and Howard's giving her the perfect stage. For the rest of the day, I moved through the house like a ghost. My body was here, but my mind replayed old betrayals. Evelyn had always been crueler than Patricia, more manipulative than Howard. If she was involved, the danger doubled. By evening, Jacob called to check in again. His voice was cheerful at first, telling me about the small cabin he and Emily had rented in the Smoky Mountains. But he caught the tremor in my tone when I answered. "Grandma, what's wrong?" I hesitated, not wanting to ruin his honeymoon, but Jacob had George's stubbornness. He wouldn't let it go. So I told him. About Evelyn. About the photo. About how the past was crawling out of its grave to strangle me. Silence filled the line for a long moment. Then Jacob said, "We're coming back." "No," I said quickly. "Don't you dare. This is between me, Evelyn, and Howard. You and Emily deserve peace. Don't let them steal your joy." But Jacob's voice was firm. "You're family, Grandma, and family doesn't let each other fight battles alone." When the call ended, I felt a mixture of pride and dread. Jacob's love gave me strength, but his return would paint a target on his back. That night, Thomas and I prepared. We reinforced the locks again, checked the cameras twice, and even kept the lights on through the dark hours. Still, my hands shook as I clutched the photograph Evelyn had left. Why now? Why, after all these years, had she returned? The answer came sooner than I expected. At 3 in the morning, a knock echoed through the house. Not pounding, not frantic. Just steady, deliberate. Thomas grabbed the baseball bat he had leaned by the couch, and I clutched my cane like a weapon. My heart pounded in my chest. Another knock. I moved slowly toward the door, every nerve in my body screaming. Thomas positioned himself by the window, peeking out. He froze. Then he whispered, "It's her." My knees nearly gave way. Evelyn stood on my porch, alone this time, her face partially hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. She didn't look like a sister. She didn't even look like family. She looked like a stranger come to collect a debt. The third knock echoed through the house. Thomas's grip tightened on the bat. "Say the word, Margaret, and I'll send her running." But I shook my head, my voice trembling. "No, I need to hear what she wants." I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling violently. When the door creaked open, Evelyn lifted her head and smiled. It wasn't the smile of a sister reunited. It was the smile of a viper who had finally cornered its prey. Evelyn stood framed in the doorway, her smile cutting through the darkness like a knife. Her eyes, icy blue, sharp as ever, locked on mine, and in that moment I felt 30 years melt away. She wasn't older in my mind. She was still the sister who had once sworn she'd destroy me if I didn't give her what she wanted. "Well, Margaret," she drawled, her voice low smug, "you haven't changed much. Still clinging to what doesn't belong to you." Thomas shifted beside me, his grip firm on the bat, but I raised a hand. "What do you want, Evelyn?" She stepped forward slightly, her gaze flicking to Thomas, then back to me. "I want what was stolen. What was always mine." I narrowed my eyes. "Our parents' estate was divided fairly. You squandered your share, Evelyn. That isn't on me." Her lips curled into a bitter smile. "Fair? You think it was fair? You always were the golden child, the one they trusted, the one they praised. Do you know what it's like to be cast aside? To watch your own sister soak up all the love while you were treated like an afterthought." Her words dripped venom, but behind them was the same envy that had driven her for decades. I remember the nights she'd raged after our parents passed, calling me a thief, swearing she'd take everything from me. Thomas's voice broke the tension. "You're wasting your time. Margaret doesn't owe you anything." Evelyn's eyes narrowed at him, then softened into something crueler. "And who are you? The guard dog? George's old war buddy?" She smirked when Thomas stiffened. "Oh yes, I know exactly who you are. George trusted you with things he didn't even tell his own family." My stomach twisted. How did she know that? Evelyn turned her gaze back to me. "That house you cling to? It was never supposed to be yours. George rewrote that will years ago. And guess what, sister? I have a copy." I froze. "You're lying." Her smile widened. "Am I? Or did George make sure the truth would come out if you tried to hoard everything for yourself?" Thomas stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Enough games. What do you really want, Evelyn?" For a moment, her mask slipped. The anger in her eyes flared. "I want the house. I want the land. I want what should have been mine decades ago. And if you don't give it to me," she leaned closer, her whisper sharp as glass, "I'll tell Jacob everything. I'll tell him the truth about his grandfather." My blood ran cold. "What truth?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Evelyn tilted her head, savoring my fear. "Oh, you know, the kind of truth that changes how a family sees everything. The kind of truth that ruins legacies. Do you really want your precious grandson to look at you differently?" The room seemed to spin. I had no idea how much she actually knew, or if she was bluffing. But the way she said it, the confidence in her voice, made dread crawl through me. Thomas stepped between us, his presence solid, protective. "You need to leave. Now." Evelyn chuckled darkly. "I'll leave for tonight. But don't think you can hide behind locked doors and old friends. Howard and I were patient, and we're not going away." She turned and stepped off the porch, her shadow stretching long in the early morning light. When she disappeared into the night, the silence she left behind was suffocating. I closed the door slowly, my hands trembling. Thomas placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. Margaret, what is she talking about? What truth? I sank into a chair, the weight of decades pressing down on me. There are things George and I kept from everyone. Choices made long ago, choices Evelyn knows just enough about to twist into poison. Thomas crouched in front of me, his eyes steady. Then it's time to stop hiding. If you want to beat her, you can't let secrets be weapons. Tell me what she has on you. Tears burned my eyes. The past was a wound I had kept stitched shut for so long, but Evelyn had torn it open with a single threat. I took a shaky breath. Years ago, before Jacob was even born, George made a decision that changed everything. A decision Evelyn was never supposed to know about. But somehow she does. And if she tells Jacob... My voice cracked. It could destroy him. Thomas's jaw tightened, but his voice was gentle. Then we fight this the only way we can. By taking the power out of her hands. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that exposing the truth would free me. But as I clutched the faded photograph Evelyn had left, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. And when my phone buzzed with a new message, my heart sank deeper. It was from an unknown number. You have 1 week to hand over the house, or Jacob learns everything. The storm had been threatening all afternoon, and by midnight, the sky above the hills of Virginia split open. Lightning cut jagged scars through the darkness, thunder rolled, and rain poured down in sheets that made the road slick and treacherous. Thomas drove in silence, his knuckles white against the wheel. His jaw was clenched, every line of his face tight with determination. I sat beside him, my fingers pressed together to stop their trembling. I had faced Evelyn before, but never like this. Tonight wasn't just about inheritance or property. It was about the truth I had kept hidden for decades. The family house loomed ahead like a memory I wanted to forget. Its windows glowed faintly, the light inside dim but steady as if waiting. My chest tightened. George had built this house for us, and now it would bear witness to the ugliest battle our family had ever endured. Thomas parked, and we stepped out into the storm. The rain soaked my hair and clothes, but I barely noticed. My heart pounded too loudly. Inside, Evelyn was waiting. Howard sat stiffly in a chair, a folder resting on his lap. Evelyn stood, her hands clasped behind her back, her eyes burning like embers. "Well," she said, her voice carrying over the sound of the storm battering the walls. "You came." "I came," I answered, my voice steady despite the fear twisting inside me. "But I won't be handing you anything." Her smile curved, cold and cruel. "We'll see." Howard slid the folder across the table. "We have George's will. The original. He left this house and much of the estate to Evelyn." I didn't flinch. That will was replaced. George changed it when he realized who Evelyn really was. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "Always painting me as the villain, aren't you? Poor, perfect Margaret. Everyone's angel. But you and I both know you've been hiding something far worse." Her hand dipped into her bag. When it came back out, she held a photograph. My breath caught. It was George, decades younger, standing beside a woman with soft eyes, holding a baby. Jacob. But it wasn't me holding him. Evelyn's lips twisted into a triumphant smile. "Tell them, Margaret. Or shall I?" Thomas shifted beside me, his voice sharp. "She's bluffing." But I knew better. Evelyn never bluffed. She had waited years to use this. My throat tightened. Jacob's mother, my daughter, wasn't George's only child. The words came out heavy, carrying the weight of years. Evelyn let out a bark of laughter, bitter and triumphant. "Finally," she hissed. "Finally you admit it. George had another child with her. And that child gave birth to Jacob. Which means..." Her voice cracked like a whip through the storm. "Jacob is not your grandson at all. You've been living a lie, and everyone deserves to know." The silence that followed was suffocating. I drew a deep breath, forcing strength into my voice. Jacob may not be my blood, but he is my grandson in every way that matters. I raised him. I loved him. I sacrificed everything for him. That is something you could never understand, Evelyn, because you've never loved anyone more than you loved yourself. For a moment, the fury in her eyes faltered. She hadn't expected me to stand tall. She wanted me to crumble. Thomas stepped forward, pulling a leather folder from his coat. And as for the will, Margaret isn't defenseless. He laid it on the table and opened it. Inside was George's final will, signed, dated, notarized. It left the house and the estate to me, with provisions carefully made for Jacob's future. Howard snatched it up, scanning the pages. His face paled. This is legitimate. Evelyn's scream was raw, primal. No, this was supposed to be mine. He promised me. She lunged at me, wild and desperate, but Thomas caught her before she could reach me. Her hands clawed the air, her face twisted with rage. Why do you always win? She screamed, her voice breaking. Why do you get everything while I get nothing? I met her eyes, and for the first time in years, I didn't see the enemy. I saw the broken girl she had once been. Jealous, hungry, lost. You lost, Evelyn, I said softly, though my words cut like steel. Because you never learned that love is worth more than anything George could have left behind. That's why George chose me. That's why Jacob chose me. And that's why, even now, you're standing here with nothing. The room fell into a tense silence, broken only by the rain hammering the windows. Then the front door creaked open. Jacob stepped inside, his tuxedo from the wedding still damp, his hair plastered to his forehead from the storm. His eyes darted from me to Evelyn, then to the photograph on the table. Grandma. His voice cracked. What's going on? Evelyn's eyes lit up. Oh, Jacob, you're just in time. Your precious grandmother has been lying to you your whole life. You're not her blood. You're mine. You're George's real grandson. She stole you from me. My chest tightened. This wasn't how I wanted him to learn. Not in this storm. Not in this war zone of memories. I stepped forward, my hands trembling. Jacob, listen to me. She's right about one thing, you're George's blood. But you're mine by choice. I took you in when no one else would. I raised you, loved you, gave you everything I had. That's the truth I never wanted to hurt you with. But it's yours now. Jacob's face was pale, his eyes wide. He turned slowly, looking at Evelyn. And you? Where were you all my life? Where were you when I needed love, when I needed a family? Evelyn faltered, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came. Jacob shook his head. You don't get to claim me now. You don't get to stand here and call yourself my family. My grandmother is standing right there. He pointed at me, his voice fierce. She's the one who raised me. She's the one who mattered. And she always will. My knees nearly buckled. Tears blurred my vision, but my heart soared. In that moment, all the years of sacrifice, all the pain, all the lies, it was worth it. Evelyn let out a scream that didn't sound human. Ungrateful boy, you'll regret this. The authorities arrived moments later, summoned earlier by Thomas. Evelyn was taken away, her screams echoing through the storm. Howard slumped into a chair, defeated and hollow. The storm outside began to fade, the thunder rolling further and further away. Inside, something broke loose in me. The chains of secrets, guilt, and fear that I had carried for so long finally shattered. Jacob came to me, his arms wrapping around me in a fierce hug. You'll always be my grandma, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Nothing changes that. Nothing. And I believed him. As dawn broke, the rain eased, and the sky glowed pink with the promise of a new day. The old house, once a place of shadows, seemed to breathe again. I stood with Jacob and Thomas, watching the light creep across the hills. The war was over. The truth was out. Evelyn was gone. But more importantly, love had won. Not blood, not money, not power, love. And that, I realized, was the legacy George had always wanted us to keep. The storm had passed, but the future, our future, was just beginning.